Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine when ancient prophecies align with modern events, as if someone from centuries ago had glimpsed our present day? The mysterious Prophecy of Malachy, reportedly revealed in 1139, lists precisely 111, or 112, mottos for each pope until the end of time. The last one, named Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, is said to shepherd his flock amidst great tribulations before the final judgment. This isn't mere coincidence or vague fortune-telling. Devotees have observed with growing amazement how these ancient Latin phrases have seemingly predicted characteristics of subsequent pontiffs with uncanny accuracy. Tonight, you'll discover a profound teaching that Padre Pio, with his supernatural gifts of insight and prophecy, alluded to regarding these end times and the spiritual crisis facing the Church in our lifetime. Before revealing this secret that has transformed thousands of lives, you must understand something vitally important about Padre Pio's teaching. The beloved stigmatic saint didn't speak of these matters to instill fear, but to awaken spiritual vigilance. With his bleeding hands marked by Christ's wounds, Padre Pio pierced through the veil separating our world from the spiritual realm. He saw what most cannot see, sensed what most cannot sense. His warnings about the Church's future trials weren't meant to terrify, but to prepare faithful souls for a time when their faith would be tested like gold in fire. The signs he alluded to regarding the final pope weren't to inspire panic, but preparation, spiritual armoring for times that would challenge even the most devout believers. What if you could recognize these signs before others, preparing your soul and those you love for the coming tribulations? Padre Pio believed that spiritual awareness is our greatest shield against darkness. The mysterious manuscript of Malachy, hidden for centuries before being published in 1595, contains coded messages about each pontiff until the end of time. While scholars debate its authenticity, believers point to its startling accuracy regarding past popes. But it's the final prophecy, the one about Petrus Romanus who will feed his flock among many tribulations before the city of 7 hills is destroyed, that most disturbs and fascinates the faithful. If you believe this teaching can transform your understanding of our times as it has for countless devotees, type in the comments, "I am ready for this blessing." The first sign that Padre Pio indicated would mark the era of the final pope is worldwide tribulation during his pontificate. Unlike the relatively stable periods of previous papal reigns, this pope would shepherd his flock through unprecedented global chaos. When Padre Pio spoke of tribulations, he wasn't referring to ordinary hardships that every generation faces. He meant systematic persecution of believers, widespread wars that would redraw national boundaries, and a spiritual vacuum where faith itself would become a revolutionary act. The stigmatic saint, with his piercing gaze that seemed to see beyond time, indicated that these wouldn't be isolated incidents but interconnected crises forming a perfect storm of physical and spiritual challenges. The prophecy's words echo with chilling precision. The city of 7 hills will be destroyed, referring to Rome, the eternal city, suggesting not just physical damage, but perhaps institutional collapse. Our spiritual resilience during tribulation is like a muscle. Padre Pio taught that the more we exercise this virtue, the stronger we become in facing life's storms. When he counseled worried pilgrims about future suffering, he didn't promise them escape, but endurance. Pray, hope, and don't worry, he would say. Not because troubles wouldn't come, but because worry itself becomes a barrier to the grace needed to overcome them. This first sign isn't merely about external events, but our internal response to them. During the final pope's reign, Padre Pio suggested, the faithful would need to develop spiritual antibodies against fear itself, cultivating an inner peace that defies logical explanation given the chaos surrounding them. This harmony amidst discord would itself become a witness to non-believers, a sign that something greater than worldly stability anchors the Christian soul. The intensity of these tribulations would serve a divine purpose, separating those whose faith is merely cultural from those whose devotion runs soul deep. Padre Pio often compared faith to diving into deep waters. Anyone can swim in the shallows, but only the truly committed venture into the depths. During the final pope's tenure, the shallow waters of cultural Christianity would recede, leaving only the deep ocean of authentic faith. These tribulations would create a church purified by adversity rather than privileged by prosperity. Smaller perhaps, but burning more brightly. The worldwide nature of these troubles would demonstrate that no nation, no culture, no segment of society would be exempt from this great sifting. Padre Pio saw this crucible not as punishment, but purification, preparing a holy remnant who would pass through fire without being consumed, carrying the flame of faith into an uncertain future. The second sign revealing the final pope would be a return to a symbolic name, specifically Peter, or something unmistakably similar. This wouldn't be coincidental but profoundly meaningful. Just as the Church began with Peter the Apostle, Malachy's prophecy suggests it will complete its earthly cycle with Petrus Romanus. Padre Pio understood the significance of this circular narrative, an elegant spiritual symmetry closing the arc of Church history. The first Peter was given the keys to the kingdom and told to strengthen his brethren. The last would use those same keys to lock the final door on one age before another begins. This name sign would be like a divine watermark authenticating the prophecy's fulfillment. Padre Pio suggested that this pope wouldn't necessarily take the exact name Peter, as popes have traditionally avoided this out of reverence, but his name, heritage, or papal motto would create an undeniable connection to the first pontiff, signaling to the vigilant that prophetic time is reaching its culmination. Names carry power in spiritual realms, something Padre Pio, who could discern souls with supernatural clarity, understood profoundly. In biblical tradition, a name change signifies a mission change. Abram to Abraham, Simon to Peter, Saul to Paul. The name Peter itself means rock, and Padre Pio indicated that the final pope would indeed need rock-like stability to withstand the storms battering the church ship. This pontiff would serve as an archetype of governance amid tempest, standing firm when institutional foundations tremble. Like Peter walking on water toward Christ during a storm, this pope would keep his eyes fixed on the divine, rather than the churning waves beneath his feet. The very selection of such a symbolically resonant name or identity would itself be a message to believers. Recognize the times in which you live. The faithful who understand these signs will have special protection during troubled times. Padre Pio promised this to those who heeded spiritual warnings with wisdom rather than fear. The connection to Peter isn't just about a name but about function, the rock-like quality needed when everything else erodes. This pope would embody steadfastness when compromise seems easier, integrity when corruption tempts, and clarity when confusion reigns. If you recognize the profound importance of these signs and wish to receive the special blessing Padre Pio promised to those who prepare spiritually for these times, take a moment now to subscribe to this channel and write in the comments, "I stand with Padre Pio's wisdom." This small act of faith connects you to thousands of others, forming a spiritual shield of prayer and awareness during uncertain times. Your spiritual journey doesn't happen in isolation. Together we form a community of vigilance, strengthening each other as the prophetic clock ticks forward. The third sign that would mark the era of the final pope, according to interpretations of Malachy's prophecy that Padre Pio found significant, would be an unusually short and abruptly terminated pontificate. Unlike the lengthy reigns of many predecessor popes, this papacy would be characterized by brevity and sudden disruption. This compression of time would itself be meaningful, as if cosmic forces were accelerating, bringing prophetic fulfillment to its conclusion with gathering momentum. Padre Pio, who understood that God's time frame often differs from human expectations, suggested that this abbreviation would be no accident, but divinely orchestrated. The shortened tenure might result from martyrdom, as the prophecy hints at great persecution, or from resignation under unprecedented pressure, or perhaps from cataclysmic events that interrupt normal succession. This temporal sign would serve as a heavenly exclamation point, emphasizing the exceptional nature of this papacy in the divine narrative. The sudden nature of changes during this pontificate would mirror the abruptness of its conclusion. Padre Pio, with his mystical insight into spiritual realities, understood that divine interventions often appear this way, not gradually like human initiatives, but suddenly like lightning from a clear sky. Be prepared always, he would counsel pilgrims, for God's timeline is not yours. This pope would make decisions and face challenges that unfold with startling rapidity, leaving little time for the gradual consensus building that characterizes normal church governance. The faithful would find themselves constantly catching up to events, rather than anticipating them. This compressed, urgent quality would separate this papacy from all others, making it feel like the Church is living through an eschatological acceleration where months contain events that previously took decades. The unexpected turns in this pontificate would themselves become signs to the spiritually alert that prophetic time has entered its final chapter. Your spiritual discernment is like a muscle that must be exercised daily to recognize these signs when they appear. Padre Pio taught that our inner spiritual senses can become dulled by worldly distractions, making us miss the very indicators we've been told to watch for. The brevity of this Pope's reign would itself be a message that eternity is breaking into time with increasing urgency. The unexpected termination would serve as a divine punctuation mark, ending one spiritual sentence before another begins. Those who have cultivated their spiritual awareness through prayer, sacraments, and attentiveness to prophetic patterns would not be caught unaware. Instead, they would recognize this abrupt timeline as confirmation that what Malachy foresaw is indeed unfolding. This recognition brings not fear but a strange peace, the serenity of souls who understand they're witnessing events foretold, who trust that divine providence encompasses even the most troubling developments. The fourth sign revealing the final Pope's era would be profound spiritual confusion within the Church itself. This wouldn't be the normal theological debates that have characterized Church history, but an unprecedented internal disorientation, where traditional teachings become contested ground. Padre Pio, who valued doctrinal clarity and sacred tradition, saw with sorrow that this period would feature disputes reaching to the very core of Catholic identity. Bishops would contradict bishops. Theologians would propose innovations that challenge centuries of consistent teaching, and the faithful would find themselves bewildered by competing voices claiming authentic interpretation of church doctrine. This Pope would find himself at the center of a spiritual storm, attempting to maintain unity when centrifugal forces pull at the fabric of communion. The prophecy's somber words about many tribulations would apply not just to external persecution, but to this internal fracturing, perhaps the more painful of the two challenges. Our certainty during uncertain times, Padre Pio taught, comes not from institutional stability, but from the unchanging Christ himself. When Padre Pio counseled troubled souls during his lifetime, he directed them away from the shifting sands of human opinion toward the solid ground of eternal truth. During the final Pope's reign, this inner anchoring would become essential. The confusion wouldn't just be doctrinal but moral, with fundamental ethical principles that once united believers becoming topics of contentious debate. This disorientation would extend beyond the Church to all religious traditions, creating a global spiritual vertigo where truth itself seems relative. The final Pope would stand as a figure of resistance against this tide, not always successfully stemming it, but providing a reference point for those seeking to maintain their spiritual bearings. This internal turmoil would create a sifting, separating those who follow fashionable religious trends from those committed to timeless truths, regardless of their popularity. The spiritual confusion would manifest in declining moral authority, as the Church's voice in world affairs becomes increasingly marginalized. Where once papal pronouncements shaped global ethics, the final Pope would often speak to a world that has largely stopped listening. Padre Pio foresaw this diminishment not as failure, but as purification, stripping away worldly influence to reveal the essential spiritual mission. The Pope would function less as a global moral authority, and more as a witness standing against prevailing currents, his power coming not from institutional strength but prophetic clarity. This reduction would paradoxically increase his spiritual authenticity, as his words would be valued not for their political weight, but their transcendent truth. Faithful Catholics would need to develop what Padre Pio called spiritual hearing, the ability to discern the shepherd's authentic voice amid competing claims and counterclaims. This gift of discernment would itself become a charism necessary for navigating the complex spiritual landscape of the final Pope's troubled reign. The fifth sign marking the era of the final Pope would be parallel global phenomena occurring simultaneously with his governance, events so unusual and widespread that even secular minds would sense something momentous unfolding. Padre Pio, with his mystical insight into the connection between physical and spiritual realms, indicated that natural disasters would increase in both frequency and intensity during this period. These wouldn't be random calamities but would form patterns discernible to those with eyes to see. Earthquakes, floods, droughts, and strange atmospheric phenomena would occur with unsettling regularity, The prophet Malachy's allusion to the destruction of the seven-hilled city might refer not just to Rome but to civilization itself, the breaking apart of human systems that once provided stability and predictability. These external events would mirror the internal spiritual earthquakes shaking religious institutions, creating a sense that both natural and supernatural orders are simultaneously approaching some cosmic threshold. Our response to these signs should be spiritual vigilance rather than paranoia, a distinction Padre Pio emphasized with his spiritual children. When unusual celestial phenomena accompany earthly troubles, what the prophecy might consider signs in the heavens, these would serve not to terrify but to awaken. Padre Pio compared this spiritual alertness to a sailor watching atmospheric changes before a storm, not to escape the inevitable weather, but to prepare for navigating through it. These global phenomena would coincide with a dramatic worldwide decline in religious faith, as materialism and secular ideologies reach their zenith. The final pope would preside over a numerically diminished but spiritually intense church, what theologians call a remnant faith. This contraction would itself fulfill prophetic patterns found throughout Scripture, where periods of apparent defeat precede divine intervention. The faithful remnant would recognize these parallel crises not as random misfortunes but as the time of trial foretold in both the Malachy prophecy and Scripture. The convergence of these global phenomena would create what Padre Pio called a crucible moment for humanity, a time of collective decision about ultimate values. The multiple simultaneous crises would form a spiritual perfect storm, forcing individuals and societies to reveal their deepest commitments. When material security, political stability, and even physical safety become uncertain, souls show what they truly worship. The final pope would function as a witness during this sifting process, pointing toward transcendent values when imminent ones fail. These phenomena would create what spiritual writers call thin places, moments when the veil between physical and spiritual realities becomes transparent, allowing even the skeptical to glimpse deeper dimensions of existence. Padre Pio saw that these global events, while objectively troubling, would serve a redemptive purpose, creating conditions where souls previously closed to spiritual realities might suddenly become receptive, as material certainties prove inadequate for the challenges at hand. Padre Pio taught that spiritual preparation for these momentous times requires three essential practices, what we might call the three pillars of protection during the final pope's reign. The first pillar is intensified prayer, not formulaic repetition, but heart-engaged communion with the divine. During his lifetime, Padre Pio would spend hours in prayer, sometimes emerging with his stigmata bleeding profusely as if the veil between earth and heaven had momentarily dissolved. He instructed his spiritual children that this kind of prayer, beyond words, reaching into contemplative silence, would be especially needed during Earth's final trials. This prayer goes beyond asking for things. It creates a fortress of spiritual protection around the soul. When Malachy's prophecy speaks of tribulations during the final pope's reign, this prayerful state becomes not just devotional but defensive, forming an invisible shield against deception and fear. Those who establish this first pillar find themselves strangely calm amid chaos, centered when everything around them spins into confusion. The second pillar is sacramental living, immersing oneself in those sacred signs that connect visible and invisible realities. Padre Pio, who could reportedly bilocate and read souls, nevertheless emphasized the ordinary sacraments as primary channels of extraordinary grace. During the final pope's troubled tenure, these sacraments would become not just religious ceremonies, but lifelines to transcendent power. The confession that Padre Pio spent countless hours hearing would cleanse the spiritual perception clouded by worldly anxiety. The Eucharist he celebrated with such mystical intensity would provide supernatural nourishment when spiritual famine spreads across the earth. This sacramental immersion isn't about quantity but quality. Not how many services one attends but the depth of presence one brings to each sacred encounter. Those who build this second pillar find themselves strengthened from within, drawing on hidden manna that sustains when external sources of spiritual nourishment become scarce or compromised during the prophesied trials. The third pillar is radical charity, love expressed in concrete action, especially toward those most vulnerable. Padre Pio, whose stigmata physically manifested Christ's sacrificial love, taught that authentic spiritual preparation always expresses itself in compassionate service. During the final pope's reign, when social structures fray and institutional supports fail, this person-to-person charity becomes not just virtuous, but necessary for survival. While the prophecy speaks of tribulation, Padre Pio emphasized that these difficult times would also release extraordinary waves of sacrificial love among the faithful. This charity isn't sentimental but muscular, requiring courage to serve others when self-preservation seems more reasonable. Those who establish this third pillar discover a paradoxical truth, that giving away one's security often results in finding a deeper security that circumstances cannot threaten. Together, these three pillars, contemplative prayer, sacramental immersion, and radical charity, form the spiritual preparation that Padre Pio prescribed for living fruitfully during the challenging pontificate that would conclude the Church's earthly pilgrimage. The signs surrounding the final pope reveal not just coming troubles, but hidden opportunities for spiritual growth. Padre Pio, despite his foreknowledge of difficult times ahead, maintained unwavering spiritual optimism. The darkest night, he would tell worried pilgrims, produces the brightest stars. This perspective transforms how we understand Malachy's prophecy, not as a doomsday prediction but as a purification process. The first hidden opportunity comes through detachment from false securities. When institutional structures shake and familiar patterns dissolve during the final pope's reign, believers are forced to distinguish between the eternal and the temporary elements of their faith. This winnowing process, while painful, produces souls who have found the pearl of great price buried beneath accumulated religious customs and cultural accretions. The upheavals that characterize this period would serve as divine chisels, sculpting more authentic disciples who rely not on external structures, but internal communion with truth. The second hidden opportunity emerges through intensified spiritual perception. Padre Pio, whose mystical gifts included reading souls and perceiving angels and demons invisible to others, suggested that during Earth's final chapter, the veil between physical and spiritual realms would thin for many believers. This increased sensitivity wouldn't be reserved for mystics, but would become more widely experienced as cosmic events force souls to look beyond material explanations. During the final pope's reign, many would experience what Padre Pio called awakened spiritual senses, an awareness of divine movements previously unnoticed in their lives. This heightened perception serves a practical purpose, allowing the faithful to navigate deception by sensing spiritual authenticity, rather than relying solely on intellectual analysis. The prophecy's dark warnings thus contain a luminous promise that souls faithful during this period would develop spiritual capacities previously dormant, making the invisible world increasingly perceptible as physical securities diminish. The third hidden opportunity lies in unprecedented unity among those truly seeking God across traditional boundaries. Padre Pio, though deeply Catholic, recognized authentic spirituality wherever it appeared. During the final pope's reign, as institutional religions face similar pressures worldwide, genuine seekers would increasingly recognize each other beyond conventional religious identities. This unity wouldn't come through doctrinal compromise but through shared spiritual hunger and common recognition of the signs unfolding around them. The tribulations mentioned in Malachy's prophecy would serve as a great leveler, stripping away religious pretensions and revealing authentic faith wherever it exists. This growing recognition among spiritual seekers would create new forms of community based not on institutional affiliation, but on shared spiritual perception. Like scattered gems revealed when floodwaters wash away concealing soil, these connections between authentic believers would form a spiritual network that transcends traditional boundaries, not a new religion, but a deeper recognition of what true faith has always been, beneath its cultural expressions. As we approach the conclusion of this profound teaching about the 5 signs of the final pope, according to Malachy's prophecy, illuminated by Padre Pio's spiritual wisdom, we must address the most pressing question: are we near the prophesied end? Padre Pio, with his stigmata marking him as uniquely connected to Christ's suffering, cautioned against both extremes, neither dismissing prophetic signs nor falling into apocalyptic panic. The proper response is vigilant awareness without fearful obsession. When pilgrims asked Padre Pio about the world's end, he would direct their attention not outward to signs, but inward to spiritual preparation. Live each day, he counseled, as if it were your last on earth and your first in eternity. This balanced perspective prevents both the complacency that ignores prophetic warnings and the paralysis that comes from excessive focus on troubling possibilities. The signs we've explored aren't meant to terrify, but to awaken, creating not fearful spectators but engaged participants in a cosmic drama moving toward its culmination. The judgment will come, Padre Pio affirmed, but not without warning. The 5 signs we've examined: worldwide tribulation during the final pontificate, the symbolic return to the name Peter, the brief and abruptly terminated papal reign, internal spiritual confusion within the Church, and parallel global phenomena, are not punishments, but merciful alerts. They function like a spiritual alarm clock, awakening souls from materialistic slumber before eternal realities break into temporal experience with undeniable clarity. Padre Pio compared this alertness to the wise virgins in Christ's parable, who kept their lamps filled with oil while awaiting the bridegroom. This oil of spiritual preparation, consisting of prayer, sacramental living, and radical charity, cannot be borrowed or hastily acquired when crisis arrives. It must be slowly accumulated through daily faithfulness. The urgency isn't about predicting exact timelines, but developing spiritual resources that will prove essential, regardless of when prophecies reach their fulfillment. The time to begin living according to these insights is not tomorrow, but tonight, before you sleep. Padre Pio emphasized that spiritual transformation happens through concrete decisions, not vague intentions. Just as he would tell penitents to begin their amendment of life immediately after confession, not at some indefinite future date, he would counsel that prophetic awareness should translate into immediate spiritual action. Don't wait for the perfect moment to intensify your prayer life, deepen your sacramental participation, or extend your charitable outreach. The moment to transform your life through Padre Pio's powerful teaching is now, this very night, before you even fall asleep. Take these insights about Malachy's prophecy and the final pope, not as intriguing religious speculation, but as a divine invitation to spiritual awakening. Whether these signs are fulfilled in our lifetime or generations hence, the spiritual preparation they inspire will transform your relationship with both time and eternity. The signs point not just toward history's conclusion, but toward your soul's preparedness for whatever challenges lie ahead, personal or collective, temporal or eternal.